So if you have a mission critical situation, you have to run if the power is out. You have to run if the internet is out. If you go down, then, or if you're breached or you have an outage, then there's follow-on effects for other systems and for society in general. So, if something has to work, it's got to be built in a certain way where you can communicate even in sort of unforeseen circumstances.
And I am pleased to be joined here at RSAC 2025 with Ian Tien. He is the CEO of Mattermost. Welcome, thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you so much.
Well, before we dig into our topic here, what is your impression of the show so far? Hasn't been open very long, but there's certainly a lot of energy here on the show floor.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Seeing a lot of old friends, making new friends. Just love the energy of the show. Love the, everyone's got, the late night events and the sort of early morning coffees. So everyone's being a champ here. It's excellent.
So for folks who aren't familiar with the company, can you give us a brief description of what you all do at Mattermost?
Excellent. So Mattermost is a secure communications and workflow solution for critical infrastructure. So think about anything you need in daily life. You need energy, you need security, you need defense, you need manufacturing. All those critical infrastructure industries need a different type of workflow and collaboration, and that's what we provide.
Well, let's talk about collaboration. Why is that so critical to the folks that you're helping out?
So if you have a mission critical situation, you have to run if the power is out. You have to run if the internet is out. If you go down, then, or if you're breached or you have an outage, then there's follow-on effects for other systems and for society in general. So, if something has to work, it's got to be built in a certain way where you can communicate even in sort of unforeseen circumstances.
Well, help me understand how that plays out in the real world. Can you give us an example of how that collaborative network would apply in the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of things right now are very interconnected, right? We've kind of moved to a software as a service and sort of an international view and saying, hey, we're going to work with all these different SaaS providers. And it's great because it's more efficient and you have like bigger security teams in these systems. But what happens is there can be outages of those systems, and if downstream, everyone's affected. If one system goes down, all these others sort of like topple as well, then it becomes a real issue. And if you're mission critical, you can't take that risk. I think everyone remembers the CrowdStrike outage, last year, which brought down airlines and all these display systems and communication systems. So that's an example. If you take critical infrastructure and if it stops working, like people can't move, first responders can't act. So mission critical systems need a separate architecture, very often on-premise or managed by a partner that says, hey, if this main system goes down or is breached, I can still operate and I can still respond to that emergency.
Well, I mean, speaking of which, as we're recording here today, just yesterday, major power outage in Spain and Portugal. Turns out it was not a cyber attack, but the downstream effects of something like that were really clear. There was telecommunications and travel and all those sorts of things. When you look at an event like that, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we serve the energy space, and very often you'll have electric utilities that have, they'll use a general collaboration solution to coordinate, and here's some PowerPoint presentations, and that's all fine. When there's a critical incident, it's the frontline workers, it's the senior managers, and even the C-suite that get real-time updates that can marshal resources across the enterprise to really respond to that outage. And you can't do that if your primary system is running on the electric grid that has the outage. So, there's going to be the primary, and then there's going to be these emergency, alternate, contingency systems. And that's, part of a mature critical infrastructure organization is going to have that across the world, here in the US, domestically, as well as international.
Are there common misconceptions or shortcomings that you run into when you're working with people, or is it fair to call them blind spots?
Yeah, so some folks, it's really about strategic foresight. It's like, until you're in an emergency, very often you can't foresee it, right? So there's this concept of tabletopping your security procedures. You're saying, okay, here's a table, we're gonna imagine what happens if certain things, come to pass. And now you have to tabletop, well, what happens if our primary communication system is breached or has an intrusion? And what typically happens is you go on WhatsApp or you go on Signal and you're like, okay, we have to respond, we can't use the primary system that has a potential intrusion. Let's take screenshots of our logs, let's go use these systems to chat and communicate and get on calls. And what happens is, you hopefully solve the solution, but you've gone outside the main system for security, But now you've got all this information floating around on people's devices. If they leave your organization, there it goes. You might be secure, maybe it's got end-to-end encryption, but it's not compliant because you have the data that's going to move around. It is no longer under enterprise control. So those are kind of the blind spots, and they're saying, okay, they don't see it until it actually happens. They don't see it until the primary system is compromised. And now they've got an emergency situation, and they have a to-do list of like, okay, we need to not do that in future. We need a secondary system. We need an emergency comms. And that's how this kind of space evolves. It's like, the saying is, it's really the battle scars that you have that really shape a lot of the critical infrastructure in the world.
Right. What's that old saying about calm seas don't make good sailors?
Yes.
Have you heard that one?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and for you all, collaboration is not just the tools that you're providing for people. I mean, you all collaborate with some of the biggest, most well-known names in cyber.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of we work with a lot of national security and critical infrastructure. So a lot of the organizations that respond to critical incidents, that set policies, that are really it's really important for them to always be running. And also another aspect is to have complete privacy on their information. So we absolutely work with some of the largest, most important organizations in the world, and it's so important for them to be able to operate and have full control of their communications and data and workflow.
Is there a part for things like open source software to play in this equation?
Yeah, absolutely. So open source is so important what we do because of its ability to adapt to any situation, as well as be resilient and independent. So right now it's April 2025. And there's tabletopping right now happening around the world. I came from Tokyo, I came from Singapore, I'm in DC, and there's tabletopping of, well, what happens if we have supply chain disruption in our digital services? What if there's some ruling, whether it's in different regulations that say, hey, we actually have to be sovereign. How could we be sovereign? How do we have a supply chain that we operate that's going to be resilient for us? So Mattermost being open source and being in control, having our customers in control, they can see all our source code, they can scan everything and understand, hey, this is going to work for us no matter what is critically important. There's sort of this, the pendulum is kind of swung to more sovereignty. And there's a mix. There's always going to be interdependence in SaaS services, but there's got to be a portion that you have full control over.
Right. And that visibility that you provide them with gives them a level of confidence. They can trust but verify.
Yes, and verify to trust.
Yeah. What are your recommendations for people who are beginning this journey? They know this is something they need to pay more attention to. Maybe it's a little intimidating. What's the best place to begin?
Yeah, I think really, it's tabletopping. Mattermost is open source. We've got our documentation fully open. We can show you reference architectures. You might use our reference architecture. You might use some other product. That's totally fine. Our biggest competitor is actually custom-built systems for defense and government, for specific nations. And what we do is say you can build it yourself, or you can use our platform, which is open source, which is highly configurable and maintain. We'll stand behind it. We're doing CVEs. We're doing patching, and we have a roadmap that constantly delivers value. But the reference architecture and how you lay out your system for critical infrastructure can be used by anyone. So you can check out Mattermost, you can check out our open source code, you can decide if you want to buy or if you want to build.
Okay. All right, well, I think I have everything I need for our story here. Is there anything I missed, anything I haven't asked you that you think it's important to share?
Yeah, thanks. I think one realization that we've seen with our communities around the world is that all software is on-premise. And the cloud is a social construct created to trust operations and data to someone else's infrastructure.
Okay.
So the world is kind of realizing that, and you're saying, okay, well, how do I think about the portion of my world which is outsourced in SaaS, which is fine, but everyone needs that portion that they have full control over. So I'll leave you with that idea, is that this is the way that the world is going, and I don't know if we're ever going to fully go back to 100% trust in outsourcing the complete systems for critical infrastructure.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, Ian, thank you so much for taking the time for us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.